here and have you take the show over. Everybody, this is Dance Heacock, and she is with the Tribes Hill Heritage Center. And today she has generously, in the past couple of weeks, put together a beautiful program for us discussing the history of wampum. So I introduce you to her and thank you for coming on to the show. And please take over.
Thank you. My name is Marjorie Ann Dancing Wind Heacock. I have double names, a discussion with my family that started at birth. My mother said I was the light one and then maybe I could pass for white. And my father said, no, she's been named Dancing Wind. And my mother said, no, she's going to have on her birth certificate Marjorie Ann and she can pass for white. That's an English woman's name. And my father said no. And my mother said, I'll tell everybody she's not yours. At which point I got Marjorie Ann on my birth certificate and I've had to live with it for my whole life. I'm the light one in the family and other people have darker skin and black eyes and straight black hair. Not me, obviously. I am a combination of Yucatec, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Southern Paiute. So I'm a four-way combination mix. I grew up in Colorado and Wyoming. So she keeps saying Eastern, and I'm going like, Eastern, not exactly. I grew up believing that anybody east of the Mississippi was absolutely bananas. And, you know, that I would never go. So when my husband first told me we were moving to New York, I said, over your dead body we are. As I've spent more than half of my life in the East now, I guess I learned to change my mind and I have fallen in love with New York, surprisingly so. When I grew up, my stomping grounds were all the way from Arizona, New Mexico, all the way up to Montana. We were the Front Range of the Rockies for quite some distance. I grew up among buffalo jumps in Wyoming and spent a lot of time in a place that's very rural. So this kind of nonsense wasn't something we did. We didn't even have phones. Flush toilets? No, that's the outhouse out back. The phones weren't, you'd have to go into town to use a party line there in order to make a phone call. The nearest radio station or television station was not, there was radio in Cheyenne, Wyoming. There was the nearest TV station was Denver, Colorado. We didn't get it. It just didn't happen out there. So later we moved to Colorado by government decree, you know, relocation acts and all of that fun. And so I ended up spending from about 4 years old all the way until I got through high school there, put my husband through college. And as he was going through college, he kept saying all about Oregon, 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 wonderful, wonderful place it was. So as soon as he finished college, then we went to Oregon and Washington and then eventually to California. And we lived in a whole bunch of different places in California. The one thing is you can take the Indian away from the place. You can't necessarily take the Indian out of the person. So I just found Native people everywhere I moved. And it was my love to compare how we did things, how we made things compared to how they were. Some of my first memories were learning how to make a knife using a piece of sandstone and a piece of bone. And I started my first knife with a turkey bone. And, you know, going through the process of learning things in the traditional ways, I fell in love with knowing how to do the traditional work, not as you would do it right now, not right this minute, not with a sewing machine. How was it done? Before all the metal tools and things like that became available. I started with a friend of mine as co-founder with Terry Robbins the Tribes Hill Heritage Center, a school of traditional arts. She decided that that was a little bit long, so we went with Tribes Hill Heritage Center. But it really is about being a school of traditional arts, how to make things the way they were made. So although I love the wampum jewelry, I can't let it go at that. I have to go back to how was it done? How was it made? Tribes Hill in upstate New York is, if you can think of the key shape of the state, it has white on one end and a long, narrow piece on coming to it. On the center of the wide end of it, okay, is where basically Tribes Hill is, and sort of middle to that bar coming out. And Tribes Hill is a place along the Mohawk River where the Schoharie River runs into the Mohawk. And it's what we're working on is tourism for the watershed region of upstate New York. But Tribes Hill itself was a trading place. You had to get out of the river and portage your canoe to there. You couldn't go up the stream without portaging your canoe. And there were lots of places where you could go for a long ways on the river without doing that. Where the Schoharie came in, that was the place where the Iroquois people and the Mohawk, in particular of the Iroquois, traded with the people that were the Algonquin peoples. Algonquin peoples had, before the Iroquois came, been the entirety of New York State. And about 1300 was when they arrived. I'm not going to go into all the details. I would just say that Tribes Hill was a trading place where people would get out and portage their canoe. It was also kind of like customs, where you would have to go through being approved. If you wanted to go up the Schoharie River to the Catskills, you were going to have to go through being in Tribes Hill. If you wanted to go up the Mohawk River into Iroquois area, so it was a place where the Algonquin and Iroquois people could meet and could trade with the French and the English in a peaceful setting in that spot. Now, across the river was Fort Hunter, which is now the home of the Schoharie Crossing. And one of the things we don't like to do over there is discuss why they built Fort Hunter. So we're about telling the rest of the history on some of this. You're not going to get all of that at this time, but let us say that for some of these things, that the Iroquois weren't as far as that trading point at Fort Hunter and Tribes Hill until about 1650. Okay. And then it became a place of battle for the area. There was a lot of fighting before the Revolutionary War up and down this whole valley. There was a ton of fighting during the Revolutionary War. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we even say it? The Quahog Shell is how I learned it, but it's spelled, can you see this? Okay. A bunch of different ways, several different ways, but it has a whole bunch of pronunciations. So according to, excuse me for a second, according to the dictionary, it's Quahog, Quahog. It's Quahog, Quahog. And I've heard it pronounced a half a dozen different ways on top of that. So if you will forgive me, I am going to call it the Wampum Shell, just because we don't have to argue about that one. They say the origins of the name of this particular shell was the north coast of the Atlantic coast of North America, and they think it was probably from the Narragansett. Some of the other things on this is that the shell is slightly different. I'm going to show you some pictures of these shells. Some of them are very plain, and they're a pretty normal, what you would consider standard clamshell look, with just this little tiny touch of purple on the side. Some of them have more purple than that. And if you've ever seen wampum, it's pretty much heavy in purple and white. Every once in a while, you get one of these odd ones that has this peachish color to it. And if you look closely, and I'm not sure if you can see that, you're going to have to tell me. See the striping over here on it? Okay, quite often there is the striping look on there, which is highly valued for making pendants and jewelry and stuff like that. This over here in the center is very flat and solid, dark purple. And that's on quite a few of the shells as well. If you were to find it tumbled on the beach, something like this little thing here is what you'd be getting. And people often would pick them up and they would start to make jewelry out of them. Way back, we're talking before the Europeans ever arrived. So much of the jewelry in the East, before there was trade beads, would be made out of porcupine quill and the Quahog shell, okay, the wampum shells. Now, you get some really different effects here, and you could see the huge variation of color. And I don't know if you can see this kind of a unusual shade of purple that's in here. So when you found it broken up on the beach, you could have quite a variety of shell colors. There's one here that shows this bright striping a little bit better over in this area. Okay, and more general striping going on over here. One of the things that for the native people made this particular shell quite valuable is that it tended to have this unusual pattern in the purple. Now, if you take a look at the pattern in the purple, what most people see is a flying eagle right here. And so what people would often do is if it broke off like this, like in half, this piece was fairly easy to make into an eagle. I have several of these, several same kind of idea with a flying eagle and whatnot. And I actually have some jewelry that was made out of, get this inked up here. Okay, I actually have a piece of jewelry that is out of the wampum jewelry, out of the wampum shell, that is made into a flying eagle. And you could see how easy it would be to find one that looks with this and simply carve it into the eagle shape. And of course, with the stripes in the earrings to go with. Now, one of the things is people always say, well, you couldn't do that. You can see these are really wampum beads in this. I don't know if you can see that up close. If I can get it close enough, can you see that? The striping of purple on the beads themselves. So those are the real wampum beads that could show up on different pieces of jewelry. When people were going to make the jewelry, the first question is, how do you cut it? I mean, this is shell. This is pretty hard stuff. How do you cut it? Now, cutters can easily be made by taking a stone like this that's been flint knapped to give you a viciously sharp edge. This is actually a piece of quartz, and this will quite efficiently cut through the hardness of a shell. So you can easily scrape along to cut off pieces. You can use it sideways to cut into a piece and to make stripes on it. So what you can do with that before you, after, you can make the general shapes. Then you can see this one, you can see the striping on that shell. You can see the vertical stripes that are made to give it the clam shape that was added to the shell. That's a thinner one. This dark purple shell is made from a little bit thicker shell, feather is made from a little bit thicker bead. And you can see if I turn it sideways, how really thick that shell is. That means that your shell could be used to make things like knives to cut things with. I have a shell knife here. The only example I have with me is this little shell knife here. And that will do quite a trick on cutting through just about anything. It is tapered from both sides, and you can see it's quite sharp on its edge. So that'll do efficient cutting just as well as stone cutters. Some of the most ferocious stone cutters would be things like this basalt piece that I found locally in New York. This is a multi-tool. People don't think in terms of the pieces having multi-tools, the native people having multi-tools. Originally, this whole piece, before a couple of chunks wore off, was arced like an ulu. An ulu is a tool that now looks like this with a metal blade, long, rounded. They get them very rounded and very big, or smaller arcs and a little bit smaller. The reason I chose this one is because it's about as simple, and it's almost shaped exactly like the shells. So what these shells could be taken for is simply to start on the outside, shaving it with a sandstone block. And a simple piece of sandstone like this could be simply rubbed along the edge back and forth in order to file this into the shape of an ulu that would be held just with your thumb down in the center here, and you could cut with the shell itself. So many functional uses of this particular kind of shell. It's the thickness of it. But if you're going to carry something to trade for a long distance, having a big piece of shell to trade, or a bunch of little shell fragments that had been tumbled in the ocean, makes it a lot easier to have something to trade than if you have to carry rock along with you. This is a sample of a nice stripy kind of one. And here's a feather with really strong striping. And see if I can get it without too much glare there. So this is both cut and also has the striping, natural striping within the feather. Now people are going, okay, so you're going to make a pendant. The pendant has to have a hole in it somehow. If you're going to wear it, if you're going to put it all over your clothing for decoration, maybe have a stripe of them down the sleeve, maybe have it attached on the end of a cord or something like that. First, how do you drill the hole? So one of the ways you can do is you can take a chunk of antler, or you can take a chunk of bone, and you can use it and use your sandstone in order to file down into a bone awl. That's all that it takes to make that. This is of particular interest to me because I'm a leather worker. So I use this kind very frequently, just because I need to, that is sharp, because I need to be able to punch holes in leather when I'm working. So this is pretty ferocious as far as sharpness. Let's see if I can make it show up. I don't know why that's not showing up. Maybe I'm too close. There we go. Okay, you can see how really sharp an object like that is. And the antler is much harder than the shell actually is. It's reinforced because the deer and the elk in particular have to clash together those horns. So that is like reinforced calcium, okay, in order to make those up. Another kind of cutter we see is a simple one. This is kind of a common tool out this direction, where this piece is a punch and this piece is a curved cutter. So if you need to cut through something, you roll it around, and it has a uluing side of it over here where it has a long curved cut. When you're working on these, actually this one I found in a local creek. I love it. Would an archaeologist ever go by and not see fingerprints on that, for crying out loud? Sitting in the Schoharie Creek, put my fingers here, put my fingers here, and I know exactly how it is used. This is a sanding stone, applied just like that in order to shave something off. So you can get quite a wide variety with just these few things of what kind of a thing you want to make. Here's a set of, I'm sorry, I just took these out of a otter tail just tied together with leather straps, something I had as a child. And when you're working with these, you have a punch, which is pretty ferocious as far as trying to drill through something. I wouldn't have any trouble drilling through a shell, just taking this and going back and forth like that. Also, another variety with a quill flattener on one end, porcupine quill, and a wider piece for doing basketry where you can slide this between the weave to open it up so you can slide things through. A general thicker, heavier punch here. And of course, this one, which is pretty nasty. I'm sure you can see the ferociousness of that point in the long one. And that is something you learn as a kid, where I was, how to do that. So you go, well, how would you work so small? And I have here a tray of very, very fine points. And these will do for drilling through a clamshell that you already have a fairly thin piece and you want to drill a hole through to hang it as a pendant. Maybe I want to put a hole here and we'll go through it. It's just a matter of rolling it in your hands back and forth and back and forth. You will drill through in a matter of time. I know a lot of people are going, this is time consuming, but what we know is it only took hunters and gatherers about a quarter of their day to take care of their needs, of the things that they needed to do. You have the rest of the day. You don't have any, you really don't have any TV. You don't have any radio. You have chat with your friends, which, by the way, you could do all of this stuff you guys are all doing while chatting with your friends. You know, you can do all kinds of different things while doing that. You can flatten quills and you can sew quills down your sleeves. There's all kinds of things that are available to be done as long as you have some light to do it with. I don't think you even, once you get that hole begun, I don't think you even have to have that. You can feel if you were going to drill through for the nights, for night work. So one of the things with the early times, you had different kinds of drills. You could make a wood drill. You could use ironwood if you had an area that had ironwood. Locally, honey locust is a very tough tree, and you can drill with that. Oak is something that grows in a lot of places. You might be able to find oak wood. I'm sure, although we never discuss it, that some of these harder woods were traded the same way that the flint points and things like that were traded, that flint and the obsidian and stuff were traded across the country. The main thing is that what we consider what was done, excuse me for just a second. When we consider what was done, we tend to discount all the soft parts because what lasts is stone. We forget that there was an awful lot of the other stuff, like the antler awls and things like that. Most of that stuff does not survive over time. Excuse me. Okay, so you have drilling tools, you have sanding. When you get done with the heavy duty sanding, I'm sorry. Lorraine, tissue. When you get done with the heavy duty sanding, you still need to make it very fine. One of the things we used for the, thank you. Sorry. One of the things we used for finer sanding was this little thing here. This is horsetail, and horsetail, the plant horsetail, and horsetail grows locally, and it does almost across the entire country in the marsh. Right now, it's kind of wimpy. It's this is how it gets its name for horsetail, though. Looks like a green horse's tail. This is what was used for sandpaper. What happens is, particularly if it grows in sand, it picks up silica and it looks like a snapgrass when it's full grown. So by the time I go picking it in the fall, it's chunkier like this. And what you use is, this has very microscopic silica spikes up and down it. And that can be used as the finish sanding in order to complete any work that you're finishing with. So that's used all the way across the country as a sanding material. Uh-oh, she's doubting it. Let's see.
Scrape it against your skin, you'll know.
Yeah, scrape it on your skin, you'll know, my sister says. Soapstone tools. One of the thoughts is that if the stone isn't hard, it can't be used to cut with. If a stone isn't hard, it's no use for a whole lot of things. People discount what Native people actually understood about rocks. What I have here is a couple pieces of soapstone, and I'll put them right in front of you. And if I take this soapstone and I go like this, there, you can see the scars and scratches. I did that with my thumbnail. It's a hardness of less than 3. If it was any softer, it would be talcum powder. We have whole mountains over here. The Berkshires are full of this soapstone in different shapes and pieces and chunks, and it's very soft. It almost feels like a bar of soap. So if you take the soapstone, you can carve it into any shape you would like. It only takes, the softest knife to be able to carve soapstone. That being said, it can be whatever you want. So you carve it out, and I actually have some statues and such that are carved out of soapstone. In fact, I have a couple of them that are some of the most beautiful carvings you ever saw. Big statues, I'm talking about really big statues that have been carved out of soapstone. And I have come across people who were doing gorgeous carvings out of soapstone. And I sat there and I said, it would have been really nice. I would have bought that from you if you'd finished it. And they didn't know they weren't done when they finished carving it. I actually have a piece that is a finished piece. This is an arrow straightener. And what happens is, if your arrow starts to get a little crooked, it's not going to fly straight. This is out of soapstone, but there is no way in the world you are ever going to scratch that. Now, what has been done is it was carved out into this shape while it was soft. Then what you do is you take and you use bear grease. It just so happens I have some. And so happens I have some of everything. So you take the bear grease and you rub the soapstone with bear grease. You needed to put it not in the fire because you'll burn it. You needed to put it in the coals next to the fire. You need to heat it up to 350 degrees and a little bit more. And you will cause this, every little cell within the soapstone will melt and weld to the next. And therefore you have done a forced metamorphic change within the rock. And you just hardened whatever you carved. So it doesn't matter that it's so soft that you can carve it with your thumbnail. If you're going to put bear grease on it and cook it in the fire, next to the fire, not in the fire, you will have a very hard rock in whatever shape you want. Now, if we knew this long ago, why wouldn't we have just made whatever we needed out of it? Not everything makes out of soapstone. Soapstone's great if you want a round, pillowy looking thing like this, or you want a carving with some detail, but some thickness so it won't break. This is not going to be something you're going to do really sharp detail cutting. I do have pieces that you can do that, the sharp detail cutting, but that's getting into obsidian and things like that. And we're not going there right now. If you were going to string that pendant that you just made, some simple little thing like this, okay, that you now have drilled a hole through, You're going to string it on something. Most common use for stringing was sinew. I don't know if you know what sinew is, but it's usually out of the back of the deer. It's the tendon, runs all the way from the neck all the way to the butt. And you take it and you pull it apart in shreds. And if you're an idiot, you use it like it is right when you get it from the deer. And if you have some knowledge of sinew, you would know you'd need one of these things. That rock does not have all those scratches all over it by accident. That would have been placed on your knee, and you would have had put the sinew over the top of it. And with your arms, you would have been stretching back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over your knee, pulling the sinew. I'm a leather worker. That's really my big thing, what I do. And if you ever stitched clothing at the seams here with sinew, if you were using natural sinew instead of the what's more commonly a wax thread, okay, if you were using the real old sinew straight out of the back of the deer, you're going to find it stretches, and so does your leather. So you go out in a rainstorm, and now your clothes leak in all different directions. Okay, you can fit this. Is when you stitch it, you put just a touch of bear grease in there. In the seam, you stitch it with a bone needle. Let's see if I can get that close enough that you can see what a bone needle looks like. And you're going to punch your holes, then you're going to stitch it through with your bone needle. And you better pull tight, okay? And then your clothes aren't going to leak. If you get stuck out in the rain, now you're dry and your sinew didn't stretch and your leather didn't stretch and you're in good shape. And by the way, you stretch your leather before you use it too. A lot. Okay, another way of doing a lace to hold your amulet that you just made is to use a leather lace. This is nothing more than leather. A knife has been taken to make it a certain thickness. Now we're going to get to wampum belts in a few minutes. So when we get to the wampum belts, this is exactly the kind of leather that would be used. There are different kinds of leather that are good and bad. And I'm sorry to say it, but what the Europeans brought was complete garbage. Just my opinion. Okay. Deer, elk, moose, and buffalo breathe. Deer, elk, moose, and buffalo make nice clothing. They're insulating both ways. I have danced at 96 degrees at Dighton Powwow. We're sitting there and we're fine. The tourists are dropping. We're going like, what's the matter with them? We've been dancing all day. They're just sitting there and they're dropping. And, you know, ambulances are taking people to the hospital. And somebody finally talked me into going into the tent and putting on shorts and a t-shirt. I was wearing full deerskin top that overhung a deerskin shirt that overhung knee-high moccasin elk boots. And that's pretty heavy covering, but that's native way. People go, how come all the old pictures show native people running around in the middle of summer dressed in deerskin clothing? They wouldn't have done that. Oh, yes, they would. I even have taken kids on little trips through the swamps. And they're going, why are you wearing your deerskin in the swamp? And I said, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out later. We come out the other end of the swamp. And what they end up with is they are covered in stickers. And I go, oh, guess you should have worn a deerskin. Sorry about that. You know, but because it doesn't pick up the prickles and things like that you would get otherwise on regular clothing. Anyhow, after I changed clothes in the shorts and the t-shirt, I was back in my deer and elk in 10 minutes. It was that much difference. It's not just that the deer, elk, moose, and buffalo breathe, but they're insulating both against cold and heat as well. If you wear the goat, the cowhide, the sheep, they don't breathe. They can do a beautiful job of deer tanned goat skin, I would never make you a garment that was out of that, because it's still goat or sheepskin. Can you do the same thing? It feels like deer skin, but the reality is when you put it on as clothing, it is not going to work the same. It's not going to be comfortable, and you'll take it off and put it on and take it off and put it on and wonder what in the world is the matter with it. And don't use pigskin. It's got little holes all over and rips like crazy. This whole idea that you should line your clothing with cloth comes from the Europeans starting to line the clothing because they're using things like pigskin for the hides. And when they use the pigskin for the hides, they end up with, because of all the little holes in it, it rips easy. I watch people in Italy trying on leather clothing, and they're supposed to be really known for the Italian leather, whatnot. And I'm going, okay, you just built all those pocketbooks and stuff of your famous stuff. It's 90% cardboard with pigskin over the top, or super thin sheepskin over the top. I'm going, what you're really selling all these people is cardboard. What do you, why are people around the world buying this? Good advertising, I guess. So we went from old beads, which were traditionally not perfectly the same length. Okay. Even though you can carve it out to the tubes and you can cut it at different lengths, there's going to be some variation. And when we have wampum belts, one of the things we saw in up until recently is that the wampum belts had different pieces of length, so you can't undo them. When the people put them together, when the native people put them together, they had to pick pieces of bead that were the right length for making the pattern end up even on the edges. And it has to do with how they put it together. History influenced the way the wampum bead was used, and people said it was used like money. I think that's not really quite the right way. It was used to more purchase favor with the Native American people, because the settlers coming up and down the valley, they had a lot of things they wanted. They wanted passage up the rivers. They wanted to go up the Mohawk so that they could get to the Great Lakes. They wanted to trade for things, services of things like travel guides and scouts. They wanted they wanted to take things that were easier to carry than knives. Iron cooking pots and axes are great if you stay on the water and you're in your boat. You still have to take all that junk out and portage it up over the falls. Okay, so it's heavy. If you were going to trade up the side rivers where there's a whole bunch of falls, this is not what you want to do. Wampum was an easier way to trade for quite a bit. And in the trading, you developed friendships for the allies, so that you would have mutual defense agreements, things like that, so that you could go on and go up and down the river safely and know that you had passage up and down the river. These alliances became partnerships before the Revolutionary War, and later after the Revolutionary War. Native people ended up pitted against other Native people in these fights before the wars, before the Revolutionary War, and after. Even people like the Mohawk people were divided. Some of the Native people sided with the French. Other people that were Mohawk sided with the English. So you had battles within their own people, which way they should go. You had later some sided with the English, some sided with the Americans during the Revolutionary War. The people who sided with the English continued to side with the English. The ones that sided with the French were now siding with the Americans. Everybody was trying to find a way to survive, because these people come in and were so numerous that it's like, okay, how do you pick the winning side? Because otherwise you're all done, pretty much. So anyway, wampum beads became a thing that was very commonly used in order to get this favor. Now, the Narragansett people of Massachusetts and the Shinnecock people on Long Island in New York were taken slaves of the Algonquin peoples, both of them, in order to produce the wampum, in order to be traded by the big handfuls of wampum and given by the big handfuls to the Iroquois. The English and the Dutch had pretty much gotten what they could out of the Algonquin peoples of the East, and were looking to expand their territory west. So one of the things I have is a large selection of wampum belts. And on this one, I may have to move a little bit back further. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you on the drilling. Some people use these bow drills that work like this, where you wind them up and then I have to tip this just a little bit. So where you wind them all the way up and then you push down and they go real well. I'm ashamed to say the one I have is made out of softwood instead of the hardwood. So the flats, the bottom end is all flat instead of being drillable because it was made out of softwood instead. But that's one of the pieces that you could see how fast you could drill. And if you put a stone point on that, you could drill very, very fast. And I can't think of anybody who didn't know how to make a simple bow drill like that, where they were also started with for fire, used for fire starters. Now, I just figured out that this whole collection of wampum belts that I have, it came up in a book, and I'm going to show you close. Wampum belts here, and this one is from the Six Nations Indian Museum. Okay, and here we have where it is able to be found, the aircrafts. Anyhow, so I started looking through the book this morning, and I had a person come into the shop and said, I saw your wampum belts, and he handed me the book. And with the book, I started looking through it, and I said, oh my gosh, these wampum belts I have named. So the first one I want to show you is the what not to do. Okay, so this one was given to me by a dear friend, and I'm going to try to get back far enough where you can see most of the whole belt. Okay, this is the Hiawatha belt, and my friend had received it long ago. He is so old that he's in the hospital trying to survive right now. He's that sick, and he'd be probably pretty close to 90 now. And this particular wampum belt, he did something he meant very well with. It came to him with the leather in absolute shreds. It came to him with the stitching falling apart. This on the end is raccoon fur. I'm sure that's not the fur that was on it. It would have probably been something like bear or wolf or something of a higher prized skin than raccoon. Fringes would have been much more delicate than this. This is not deer skin. This is cowhide. It was stitched onto the cowhide with, at the very edges here, not with sinew, which is very strong, but with cotton thread. So I'm going like, oh no. He started out fairly well, and you can see on this edge how nice and neat these pieces are in here, and they're lined up on the bottom and lined up on the top. I think about the time he got this far, he got tired of it, so he took all the white beads off and sort of made the pattern. And then if I show you up close here, look at the edges now. Okay, the pattern is all pulled aside and pulled aside. Whether I'd have the time enough to go back and repair this, one of the things I want to encourage people to not do is don't fix something if you don't know how. If it's of historical value, please, please, please don't just decide you're going to slap it back together again in some way, because this is not the right thing to do with something. Okay. This came with a letter that was inviting the man, Joseph Brandt, who's very well known out here. Here, I'll give you that one back. This fellow, Joseph Brandt, is very well known for being the Mohawk fellow who was working with Sir William Johnson. Sir William Johnson was an Indian agent who was right here in this area near Amsterdam, New York, at Fort Johnson, up in Johnstown, who it was named for. Amazingly, at the end of the warring, after the Revolutionary War, he ended up owning about a third of the state in this area. And the native people, the ones that sided with the English, they were shipped off to 6 nations in Canada. And the native people that were siding with the Americans ended up way up north, Akwesasne, on the border with Canada, and most of them lost all their land. A good friend of mine, Tom Porter, who's with Ganajohalege, has brought a piece of the Akwesasne Mohawk down back along the Mohawk River, and to his credit, he went just the far side of Big Nose and landed in where the Mohawk had come to live. Okay, the next one I want to show you is the William Penn Wampum Belt. Now, this is the first William Penn Wampum Belt. And this wampum belt was an agreement between the Lenni Lenape people and William Penn, who is a Quaker. And this one is one that I received from my husband, and he was Quaker, head of the Duanesburg Quaker Church, as far as being the clerk. They don't have heads, they don't have priests in the silent Quakers, and they don't have churches, they have meeting houses. So anyhow, the promise was to get along with the native peoples, and they did here. In this area, they had a problem up in Saratoga Springs area where the burning of the valleys was going back and forth. Back then they had a latch to latch their door, and it was a bar latch, and it would come down like this over a piece that held it. Boom, right into place. And in order to pull that latch up, if you were on the outside of the door, you couldn't get in unless you had a rope out through the door itself. So you would take that rope, pull the rope, the latch would come up, and now you could go in. If you were expecting company, you left the rope out. If you didn't want somebody to come, you would pull the rope in. The Quakers always left the rope out all the time. So when the burning of the valleys went through, and it went on the native side, it went on the non-native side, it was just back and forth over years. So the native people left the rope out. That meant friend of all, and there was a white feather placed in the rope on each one of those houses. The native people put the white feather in that rope, and none of those houses were touched. The next one is, let's do this one. This one is the Six Nation Wampum Belt, and you can see it's pretty much identical to the one in the picture out of the book. And it is, let's get back far enough, it's a little bit longer. And you can see the 6 nations represented here. That tells us the timeline. That means that this is after the Tuscarora were added to the original 5 nations of the Iroquois: Cayuga, Seneca, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. Okay. And the Tuscarora were taken in by the Iroquois to become part of their 5, the 5 nations of the League of the Iroquois, because they were about to be sold by the US government into slavery to Europe. So they were originally from the Carolinas. And here you go. I have my sister here who is helping. She's helping me with reach things and stuff like that. She comes up from Florida, and her name is Lorraine Steffens, and she's kind of helping me out. She's better on dates and things than I am. So the next one is one I'm not sure of. The wampum belt I have in the picture here shows these squares, but they show a dark square in the middle. This one that is shown in the picture was for Great Britain and the Six Nations, a friendship belt. But this one has no second square here inside, dark square. So it was probably a friendship belt, but not necessarily a friendship with Great Britain. It could have been a different group that was being befriended at the time. Another thing we see is these little tiny belts. When somebody might be adopted into one of the nations, they might get a small personal wampum belt that maybe they would keep it in a medicine bag or stitch it on their clothing in order to, people would know who had adopted them and where they, and they would have been also given a name at the same time. So that was often with the naming during an adoption ceremony. This one here, I fear may be the original. And this one is the belt of the Six Nations. Here, I hope, did I pick that up the right direction? I do not think I did. I think I have it upside down. Anyhow, we have, let me show you this one. This one here is the Six Nations belt. And that includes this little odd thing right over here in this corner down here that is showing that is the invader corner that is about the other people who had come. So you can tell that's definitely after the Europeans came. Let's see if I can get this back enough. If I get it close enough, you can see over here a great deal of repairs that were made to this. The one in the picture did not have the fringes, but the fringes on the edge here could easily have been added at the same time as the repairs were made in order to finish off and not just have the sinew strings hanging. So I'm like, okay, didn't realize quite what I had my hands on. These here are a more modern one where these could be armbands. Let me get a little bit further back. An armband to go around the arm, a knee band for the dance materials. Just saying, with Velcro, I'm not finding it's probably new, anything but new. So probably wouldn't use Velcro sometime back. That's all right. It's interesting. Okay. Some of the kinds of things that get made as we come into a more modern time is some of the jewelry is, I showed you just a few small pieces. This is one that was made for me by Larry Two Hawks, who's Oneida, lived in my backyard for 8 years and in a trailer with his bear dog. And you can see it has the eagle here in the center. I kind of rewound the necklace part of it down and around. It has small pendants of wampum and he carved these all himself as a gift to me while he lived with me. And he's probably, my gosh, he must be about 95 now. But it was, I felt a beautiful piece, but it was a really good example of hand drilling in these cases and hand carving and hand polishing every last piece. And considering as there's pretty much blind and deaf, that was pretty good that he did that by feel as he worked on it. I have another piece here that is Wampum Discs. This has two more discs that are over the back that you can't see. With a single one, and you can see how much striping there is within these individual pieces. And these are little tiny chunks of wampum up the sides as well. But you see the silver beads added to them. So you know that's a little bit more modern than the original one. The next kind I see is, I have a friend that does this. Her name is Irene Peters. And she's, if you try to catch up with her, she's Wolf Spirit, a family affair on Facebook. And she does just really spectacular work. One of the earlier ones that I got from her was where she takes this, and I don't know if I can get it close enough. She doesn't just bead here with very small beads. She beads all the way up and all the way around to the back. So you can see here's leather. See if I can get this up here close. I'm sorry, I'm not too good with this machine yet. Leather on the back. The tab that holds it to the string is beaded here. Can you see that? And then these wampum beads, which are the striped wampum beads here, actually out of the Quahog Shell. Wampum Shell. And those are very, very, very round. And the individual pieces here, a little bit more shell. She also takes and adds the bone shells with them. And you can see how she's beaded here, a little bit more modern with the pearl beads, very small, very dainty little pearl beads with the Quahog Shell pieces. Just gonna take it out because it'll be easier to show you. With the Quahog pieces up, you can see that beading up close where she went all the way around the shell, starting with smaller shells, getting bigger to the outside edge. And you can see the edge here and right onto the leather backing that holds the shell. So here. And the next ones I have they're a little bit more modern. This is really, though, a takeoff of what has been done in the past. It's just a little bit different shaping of the shell here into a heart shape. You'll notice the same striped lines, just basically a hole drilled. This one was probably drilled where it was with a, Dremel tool these days, and a little bit of added in the silver jewelry, silver chain and silver top to go with that. And one of the interesting kinds that is coming up now is the shell is being picked up in other parts. And I'm going to take this one off here. I'm going to show you the bracelet first. The bracelet has the back, very silvery, the front, and it's inlaid into the disc and with chain between. Okay, so they made the silver disc to mount the shell on, mounted the shell on there, and made the bracelet. So you have all this different variety of stripings on the bracelet. Some of here's one that is in the more modern, and this is, you can see the silver inlay right down the middle. Okay, with not beading around the edge, but the metal of the silver work mounted around the edge. There, we get a decent view of the side there. With a feather look, but it's inlaid to get the feathering look. Not that the stripes came like that. And then, of course, this one I'm probably going to have to take off here too. No, maybe not. And then this one, which you can see the detail of the inlay pieces, individual shell pieces laid in there. And here, the earrings, super thin, teeny tiny shell pieces inlaid here. So that thing, if you can see how fat my fingers are, that's pretty narrow little earrings, but they wobble pretty good. But this is once you start adding silver to making the jewelry with the wampum. So of course now it's modern tumblers and it's chain beads around the medallions and it's inlaid in silver. But do you have any questions?
Thank you so much. I'm just in awe about this whole presentation. Had no knowledge really about anything. Thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask?
I do, actually.
Okay.
I'm wondering, in those old wampum belts where you had the small beads that were basically tubes, how were those little beads drilled? Maybe you said it and I missed it, but if
Yeah,
you-
no, it's okay. Bone
okay.
like this would have been narrowed even more narrow, and you can get some pretty ferocious spikes out of any kind of bone. Antlers even better. So if you were going to break antler to use pieces for something else, and we used to use bone, like even turkey bone flutes and things like that, that's pretty sturdy on the leg bones. Okay, so but antlers even better. So if you already have a fairly narrow antler piece, perhaps one like this, you keep filing it down. You can actually file the antler pieces down. I don't know if you can really judge the thickness of this, but you know, people go, well, won't you break it? Well, if you have a whole bunch of antler pieces and chunks that you saved, you have, you know, so what if I break it? Make another one, you know, takes you what? 10 minutes to file it on a piece of sand, you know, sandstone, just going back and forth. Got to find the filing in. There we go. And, you know, you want that a little thinner? No problem. File it right on down. Especially, here's one of my favorite, the really fine sandstone. And I just go like this. Takes you seconds to bring that down tighter and tighter and tighter. So it's one of the first things you learn, at least first things I learned when I was a kid, is how do you make your own knife, and how do you make your own needles, and how do you make your own punches. All that stuff was standard. Like by the time you're 4, you should be able to make all those things. It wasn't like, oh, don't give that kid a sharp knife. And I'm going like, how are they going to ever learn how to cut things? You don't give them a sharp knife. You learn pretty quick that you shouldn't poke yourself with it, you know, or anybody else. That's just part of growing up.
Question, that tool, that big gigantic tool you used, was that for drill? Yes, how was that used again, and what was that used for?
Okay, this was for drilling anything.
Okay.
These were wood, hardwood, but that's how this got its holes. The gauge.
I wanted to see that.
Yeah, the gauge got its holes, and it used to be 8 holes, and you can see one of them broke through down here. Okay, and you would simply take this, put it where you wanted to start. This would have a nasty sharp edge. This one doesn't have a nasty sharp edge because some ding dong made this one with a dowel, and it's soft wood. It should have been made with something like oak or honey locust that you can, you know, try to saw down a honey locust, holy cow, you know, that is some tough wood. Well, this should have been a hardwood here. This wouldn't have made a lot of difference what kind of stick this was out of. You can always replace it. If you used, instead of string, you could use sinew right through here. You took one you already had, you bored a hole through this and this and this. With the bow drill, you make them all the time, you know. You can drill through the soapstone, and then you can see the soapstone.
Mhm.
You see how that's the light color inside and the dark color outside? So this was drilled while it was soft enough to scratch with your thumbnail. Then you put it in the fire, cooked it with the bear grease. Now you have a hard stone to work with, okay? And that's what you're using as your gauges. And you can use the gauge with the bow drill just as well as you can use the gauge with a punch to go through. So if I put it right, you can see here, punch that way through that hole, coming back through the same hole in the opposite direction, you get a different width of hole and you get a different depth of how deep you're going to go. So gauges were very useful. And by the way, I didn't make this one. I dug this out of the river too, with a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm amazing at finding things that people don't seem to know what they are. We have
Now,
a
do you teach making those tools at this Heritage Center?
We would if we were open, where the museum is in the mall, and right now it's closed. We're hoping to be going back into the Viaport Mall in Rotterdam, but whether we can do this kind of stuff there or not with the pandemic is in really big question, you know.
Well, further down the line, we'd like to have you on again to talk about possibly the other pieces you have to share. I mean, tell us a little bit more of what you carry at the museum. I see you have beautiful murals as well, a whole leather area.
Yeah,
a
I have
weaving
beaded
section.
bags. I have beaded fur bags that you might be interested in that are some of them absolutely, most of them are on the
Let's
back of my-
schedule a meeting on the
Oh,
beaded
I'll
bag,
show you a sample right here that's
but let's get a
on my
teaser now.
wall. This is an elk foot bag. So
Calm down,
it's
Yvette.
hard for me to get where you can see the whole thing, but this is an actual beaded bag. This is the fur of the elk here on this side, and on this side, that is actually the foot of the elk on which the elk foot bag is made. The beading is of an elk by a tree in the moonlight. It has a flap here, which is bone, that is the latch. It has inside here trade wool. And I have a whole huge assortment of such bags. This is the beginning of the discussion of the change in how beading was done in New York State. And it has a lot to do with how do you make money when people come in and kill all your deer and things like that. You have no way to make a living. How are you going to make a living now? And it has to do with the Dutch, and it has to do with things that were done locally in the area. And it's the change in beading over time. This was considered, no, not at all. This was considered blasphemy, so to speak. What is the word I'm looking for? You don't do things that worship the animals. So this was going to get you killed to make a bag like this. When Christianity came in, this was worshiping animals. That was paganism, and it was not to be allowed. So then I have the rest of the series of what was allowed through beadwork over time in New York State, because you couldn't do that. And by the way, people go, but there aren't elk in New York. There were what they called the big deer in New York. That's the elk. That's what was here. Right now, there's a move where they're going to where they are reintroducing elk into the Catskills, where they were. After the Europeans came, the elk were the deer, which were elk, were completely hunted out of this area. So what happens is the government went back down south and they brought up the much, much, much smaller white-tailed deer
And mule deer.
and the mule deer. And those were brought up into this area. The white-tailed deer did fairly well. Mule deer, not as well. We do have mountain lions and have had mountain lions here for a long, long time. They live in the Catskills. They've not gone away. They're coming back in from the north where they came all the way across through Canada, okay, and are coming in the area. By the way, have one that's been caught on video camera in my backyard, which is, thank you. But since that's kind of my spirit animal, I don't
So
argue.
down the line in like a couple of weeks,
Mhm.
could we do another talk about those bags and the history?
Sure.
Because that sounds like an amazing
You will not believe.
discussion.
I'm sorry I was going off on the tooling end. That one I'm a little bit more on the beading end, but you know, I know how they're done. I don't do them personally. I know that some of them that I have took years to do. You know.
Yes, well, the group that we're with is mainly all beaders.
Mhm.
We're crazy about our
Gonna hate
beads.
beads. You're just gonna hate.
So that would be, I mean, I know we took a lot of your time today,
No,
but
that's okay. My
so-
sister says that you will not be able to drool on them from this distance.
right. I'm pretty sure everybody would have had their DNA all over it.
We'll just drool on our own things.
Yeah.
It's bad when you. look
So,
at
but
these-
that sounds like a great discussion at your convenience on a Sunday down the line. We'd love to do that. Again, today it's May 31st,
Mhm.
2020. We're broadcasting live from Southern California. We're here with Dancing Wind Heacock, and she has generously donated her time to share with us the history of the wampum beads.
Can I say that Tribesville Heritage Center is on Facebook if you're looking for us. And I Dance Haycock at outlook.com.
Mhm.
And my phone number is there if anybody needs to catch up with me. But
I will add that to the post, and if anybody
Okay.
wants to get a hold of you, I would definitely be glad to share the information.
Can I just say something really quick, Gracie?
Sure.
I just, Marjorie is your name, right?
it's Dance. I mean, that's
Dance.
what everybody calls me is Dance.
Well, my name is Yvette, and I'm from the San Carlos Apache Nation. And I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much. I didn't know anything about wampum. I still don't know anything about wampum, but I just really appreciate your time and your knowledge of it. And
I didn't
I
know
just wanted
anything
to
about
say that.
wampum when I got
Thank you so
out here
much.
either in the East. So, you know, it's taken being with so many people that had wampum and worked with wampum that I had a chance to learn anything about it.
Now, do all the tribal members wear wampum?
Quite a few of them have jewelry pieces that are, they might have wampum, like I have turtle bags and things like that where the wampum is added as pendants and things.
The
Yes,
purple and the white are significant with the Iroquois people. That's their two main
right,
colors.
right. If you were Iroquois, everything you had would probably be purple and white, pretty much. But you know, there's just a lot of wampum in the entire Northeast, but partly because it was the availability of the Quahog shell. One of the other kinds of shells that was used is the Denterlium shells. And Denterliums are what I grew up with. They're much more fragile. You can't make these into a knife or something like that. And people go, why in Wyoming would you have Denterlium shells? But you have to go historically back to it being an inland sea. The ocean used to be in Wyoming. and Colorado on the eastern.
I
side
believe
of
that.
Colorado.
I live in Colorado and there's sand everywhere and I totally,
Yep.
it had to have
And-
been water before.
Oh yeah, there was a whole inland ocean that was in the middle of the continent. And so Denterlium shells were something that we could find in Wyoming up in the sandy areas that are, still, as the wind blows off, as it does, it blows off the top of everything. And then
Yeah.
sometimes there's Denterlium shells that have still survived, and they're not fossilized. They're just Denterlium shells. But you can find where you can find a patch of them. You can usually find quite a few of them.
Cool.
So some of our earrings were real long strands of Denterlium shells.
Mhm.
And what tribes are you from again?
I am Yucatec, which is a Mayan people, which to my own shame, I don't know a lot about, out of Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. I'm Arapaho and Cheyenne, which is Cheyenne and they're so intermixed in Wyoming and Colorado that,
So you're northern.
yes. And then it's also Southern Paiute. So, like I said, my stomping grounds is Arizona, New Mexico, all the way to Montana.
Very cool. And how you ended up in New York?
Well, my
Crazy.
husband, when he graduated college, was going into food processing. So first we went to a nut company in Oregon, and he wouldn't agree that the nuts were any good. They were rancid. And we moved out there when there was a 25% unemployment. And I think they thought bringing some young guy straight out of college, having paid to get out there, they will agree, the guy will agree to say the nut meats are okay, so they could get a loan. He wouldn't do it. So we ended up with him not working for a couple of years while I was working out there. Having a house husband was kind of cool. And then we moved eventually to where he did tomato processors in California. And then he went to winery equipment because he was mechanical also. So he had, his majors were biology and microbiology, chemistry, but he was very equipment, machinery oriented. We used to work on cars independently, separate cars. He fixes his car and I fix mine. Thank you. And I've only done head all the way down to head gaskets, but that's not bad for a gal, I guess. So
No.
you didn't get the training from your dad that a guy would have gotten. So we moved there, and then with that company, they decided they wanted to try the wineries in the Finger Lakes in New York and try to talk somebody from California to moving to New York. I think they had that feeling about New Yorkers, like we had, oh, there's nobody saying East Mississippi, forget that. I'm not going there. Well, it's not all New York City. And most of the upstaters actually don't ever go to New York City. There's insanity.
I would never.
No,
Yeah.
That's like an anthill. It's terrifying to me, but
Yeah. It probably makes you dizzy.
Yeah. And I drove in San Francisco without a problem. I drove in Los Angeles without a problem. We lived in 3 different parts of California. So we were Madera, Sacramento, and Salinas, all 3 of those. So it was fun to learn so many different native ways of doing things all over the country, and having known so many people. When we got back here, I went on the powwow circuit to pay for college, so I could have a master's plus 60 and teach all, I have all the sciences and all, and I ended up teaching math as well for 20 years, and went for the rough and tough. Let's play hardball with the roughest, toughest kids in New York. So that's all right. I really enjoyed working with those kids for that many years. And before I retired that last year, the Heritage Center was taking off so strongly. I said, I think I need to retire so I can do the Heritage Center. And the next thing you know, things were just pouring in. You know, the wampum belts came with the thing from Keepers of the Circle that was started by an Iroquois fellow and a bunch of Native people together locally. Then other things have closed and they said, well, please put this in. People have walked in with all kinds of things I never would have believed were out there, where people are going, I have a family collection. Would you take this? One fella came in with a whole tray of his family artifacts and in nice cases. And I said, would you mind if I took this apart? And he's so nice. He goes, yeah, go ahead, take it apart. So I said, I'm going to put this in the order of putting the same kinds of things together. And he was out of Schoharie, along the Schoharie Creek. He had found these throughout his childhood and his adulthood, and they were artifacts that were out of that area. And we're finding many of the artifacts in this area are in about the 4,000-year-old range, until I got a pile of dirt over here for putting in the garden, where I just found a double pick, which way outdates that as far as old. So I'm having artifacts dumped in my garden, that we got another dozen of them that direction. I can't go down any river without finding artifacts around here, and lots of them. There were millions of people that lived in this area.
Yeah, I mean, that was where the first encounter happened.
Well, actually, we found the turtle houses, where there is a site that has 130 at last count, but we just found a whole bunch more of turtle houses that were stone structures that had stone turtle heads, stone turtle feet, the way of feet, the feet would come off the turtle, and tails on some of them still left. And I was told in Wyoming, what was the rest of the story behind that being ours? And I'm going, okay, I'm Arapaho and Cheyenne up here with my people, and I'm getting the story of New York and the Blackfeet from Montana, and the entire story of the migrations of our people. And when we opened the Heritage Center, we ended up with hundreds and hundreds of people who came in and said, I'm this and this, and I live here, and my people are from here, and these people are combined. So I'm several kinds of Native people, and I can't figure out why I'm what I am. And I said, would you like to know the rest of the story?
Tell 'em how big the turtle houses are.
Turtle houses, she says to tell you how big the turtle houses are.
They're not
The,
little turtle
the
houses.
turtle houses that were people structures were 35 feet by 45 feet.
Wow.
And they're all over the area. The stone walls lead to special sacred places, a place where there are four waterfalls on the same stream. We find these sets of trees that we call sentinel trees. And among these, they have grown from being a single tree, and they puff out like a redwood. So you get rings and rings and rings, 72. I thought I was going to count so many. I was going to be so excited if we got 16, because for the Algonquin people, 4 is the special number. So I'm going, okay, 4 4s is as good as it gets. So I found 8 rings, and I'm going, oh, this is great. But wait, there's more. 72 rings from the center of these sets of trees that walk along this canyon that has the waterfalls in it. And the top of the canyon is a huge a huge beaver valley that would have been completely filled with beaver dams. And the other end of it is landing in the Mohawk River. And this was a very special place with these things all the way along them. I'm going 72 by 72. If you divide it by 4, what do you get? You get 13. 13 moons on the back of a turtle for the people.
Wow, that's a big medicine.
Houses. So I'm going like, and I was asked by a fellow locally who's a white fellow, and he said, he came into the mall and looked at the museum, and I said, well, so what in particular are you interested in? And he says, I'm interested in stones. And I said, okay. So I took out my tray of not the usual artifacts, the stones that I know what they are, that the archaeologist doesn't seem to ever see or pick up, or if they have them, they don't ever tell you what they are because they apparently don't know what
Don't
they
know.
are. Yeah. So I started with that set, and he says, I want you to go to see some stone piles with me. And I'm going, okay, this is what I've heard the Adirondack cairns must be. Somebody stacked up stone piles, but it's a hike in the woods cross country. And I'm all about, let's get off the trail and let's go down the canyon. I mean, I'm a geologist by training, and anthropology is one of my side majors, but biology, chemistry, physics, all of it. So because for me, the world is round, everything is whole, and everything is interacting. So I can't understand the world in any way but to understand the whole thing of it. So one of my majors is atmospheric science. My sister's over here laughing her head off. But so we're both of us, multiple, all the sciences together, because that's the only way you can understand how the earth works and how everything is related, no matter what you do. So anyhow, the guy took me on this hike, and he's showing me this pile of stones, and my eyes just went big, and I'm like, this is the thing that I saw the drawings of in my uncle's house in Wyoming.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going like, I don't know. What is it? He's going, this is, and the first one didn't look right. It was the shape of the footprint of a canoe. And I said, well, maybe it's a canoe storage spot, but that was unusual, and it didn't have anything underneath. When we got to the other ones, they were rounded stones and 2 rings, a double ring all the way around the outside, and that it had the flat stones, 10% roughly of flat stones. And it wasn't because there wasn't available. It was built this way deliberately. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, that's the drawing I had. And I redrew it. And people are like, you redrew this from memory? And I said, well, I used to argue with my uncle because it requires these big trees. I said, we've got cottonwood. Where are you getting, in Wyoming, trees like that? I don't think so. There's no trees like that to make it with. How are you getting the ones that have to bend like this? Okay. Well, the canyons here have them, and they're bending like this so that they have fewer cells on the inside of the curve, and they have longer cells, and they grow that way because they're growing against the creep of the hill to try to stay upright. And those are the trees that are put over as part of the arch of the turtle houses. It takes the double rows of stone to put it together, but they have ventilation shafts, and that's what the 10% is. So having been to places like Mesa Verde and the Pueblos over and over, and the, different things like Acoma Pueblo and stuff like that, I'm going, this is something I learned, then went back and saw these pictures that my uncle had. And I said, okay, I understand the ventilation systems. We find the irrigation systems are here with the double rows of stone throughout the land. We found the aquaculture where fish were farmed. My brother raises trout at 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, and he fish farms at 10,000 feet. And then every time because the hole is so deep that he can go over there with an axe and chop it open and put his line in, catch a trout and bring it up and go home with fresh trout. Well, that would work the same here up the side creeks, but it isn't up the major creeks. It's up the minor creeks where they raise different kinds of fish, because we had a salmon run that came all the way up to the Mohawk, and it came up the North Chuctanunda and the South Chuctanunda creeks to both sides in this area where they went up the Schoharie Creek. So, you have to look at what was the natural setting at the time. why don't we find these things down along the Mohawk River? Because where the Mohawk River is down here used to be a marsh about this high.
Yeah.
Okay, in comparison. And then you have to look for the housing up above the marsh. People go, oh, everybody always traveled along the river. And I'm going, you know what? We can see by topo maps exactly where these villages will be. And they are following a topo line. They are following the ridges all the way from Minnesota, where the Ojibwe are, all the way to Maine without changing elevations. And the marshes are off the side. And the travel wasn't on the river. The travel was by foot. And how do you go without hunting in somebody else's hunting territory? Because you had stops where you could restock for food along the dried foods along. We have found the bowler houses as well, where the food drying facilities were and the hide processing facilities were. And it's in the same place where this great big village was. And we're like, oh my gosh, it's the entire system. And we can tell you where the pathways will be. And we find the stone walls and the same features all the way along these paths that we are finding throughout New York that go all the way to Maine, through Massachusetts, Connecticut, and stuff. And you can pick out exactly where it will go just looking at topograph maps, and then you can figure out where it is.
Wow.
Been ripped
Wow.
out. So
We're
I'm working
getting
with Mira.
really a lot of great information here.
Yes.
Just and I hate to say if you said
Yeah.
it before, but the shells.
Mhm.
I know we're talking about wampum and shells
Mhm.
and all the processes, but are they specific to one area?
Yes, they are in the northeast United States. They're off the coast, pretty much from Virginia up further north. Apparently, they needed the colder water that comes down, the Labrador Current coming down from both the Labrador Current that comes to the west side of Greenland, and you also have the backlash from the current that goes up the coast, the Gulf Current, which goes all the way across to first England and like that. It keeps them a lot warmer, but the backlash of that is to come down the east coast of the US. So you've got this double cold current coming southward, and that's where you find them on the east coast. They are not on the other coasts as far as you have the big fat gooey duck shells, but they break easier in Oregon. I mean, those are some
There's
hunkin'
some white
clams.
clams in the Gulf of
Right,
Mexico, but they're
right.
not-
Yeah, but they don't display the same purple coloring and the stripiness of it. And it certainly doesn't have the eagle pattern on it, you know?
No,
So-
that's interesting. Again, today it's May 31st, 2020, and we have been speaking with Dance
Heacock.
Heacock out of Tribes Hill Heritage Center. And she's just given us amazing history about the wampum beads, the shells, the creating of them, the tools, and a little bit more history. And possibly she's going to come on and talk about beaded handbags that you're not going to find at all. I have never seen a purse.
I've
like
never
that,
even
so.
seen one of these in a museum.
Exactly. So, and before we wrap up, I would like to acknowledge somebody who connected with me with you last year, and I had wanted to go to visit you personally, and his name is Peter Borsetz. So I did
Thank
want to
you.
mention him and thank him. And I forgot to send him the link for this, but he'll be able to see it on Facebook. And it's about 10 past 1. I'm going to put links to your Facebook page.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank your sister Lorraine Steffens for being a wonderful help there. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you, everybody, for
Very
coming.
good very good information as well.
Yes.
He's a
yes.
feathersmith.
I'm sorry.
He's a feathersmith.
Ah, okay.
Now that's a whole nother ball of wax. You have no idea.
Okay.
There's tufting. Oh no.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to be ending the show. It's live on Facebook, and I will be adding the links to her Facebook page. And thank you so much for joining us.
It was
I
nice-
really
nice
appreciate
to
your
meet you
time.
all.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Great week. Safe week.
Bye, Gracie.
Bye, kids.